Yeah. Just do it. Is it close to like by his face? Let's go. Yeah.
Action.
Alan, thank you so much for joining me here today at Orchard Market, a place that's very close to your heart. First of all, can we go into how did you become a filmmaker from scratch?
Okay, well, it's probably not the conventional answer that you want. So I started to think about making films probably early 2000s. But life, as life does, got in the way with work and everything else. I'm a writer that's what I do, I'm a writer. So when lockdown arrived, for me it was a gift. So I decided to go and buy a ton of big gear, bought a camera, lights, etc., and decided to try and make a couple of small films. So that was how I initially got into filmmaking. I mean, there wasn't any big, anything really. It was just a case of buy a camera and press a red button. I had the ideas because I'm a story writer, so I have lots and lots of stories. And I was kind of thinking, how can I translate this into film? And at the same time, I wasn't really working with scripts at that point. I had more of a kind of different dimension to the way I was making the films, which is I had all these scenes in my head. I thought, well, I can make the scenes and put them all together and do some kind of edit. But I had to work out how to do everything. So the filmmaking began from scratch, but it felt simple because I knew how I wanted things to look when they were done. So I could always see the finished film or product, call it what you want, in my head. I just needed to be able to use the camera and the sound and make a ton of mistakes. I mean, made tons of mistakes.
I love that. What do you think is the beauty of being an independent filmmaker? What do you think is the magic behind it?
It depends what kind of independent filmmaker you are. If you are overtrained, in my experience, they tend to stick within the boundaries far too much. So when you are completely independent, you've had no training, you just make a film. So you don't have any restrictions at all, like no restrictions whatsoever. So just being able to do a film without those restrictions gives you a much more freer sense and ability to be able to expand it and go in any direction and really do what you want.
Brilliant. So like you said, you tend to, independent filmmakers get to they don't have to abide by any rules. So what have you done to avoid kind of traditional aspected filming routes, if you get what I mean?
Well, I suppose the truth is I didn't really know any traditional film routes, so I just went and made a film. So I wasn't really quite sure how it was done until I started making a film. I thought, well, do I need somebody to record sound? And then I spoke to somebody to record sound, and he would say, well, have you got this guy? And I said, no, what do they do? So it was kind of building up layers and layers and layers of different aspects and elements within the film, the mechanisms of making a film. And suddenly you realize, I need 10 or 12 guys to kind of, for example, as a colorist. So somebody said to me, who's going to color it? I said, well, what do you mean color the film? And he said, well, you need somebody who's going to color it, blah, 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 blah. So I did a little bit of investigation into that. I thought, okay, that's quite a cool idea. So we can take this scenario and make it look slightly different. We can enhance the mood, decrease the mood, make it warmer, make it colder, and so on and so on. But so I found out those things as I was going along. So for me, it was quite easy because kind of that's how I've lived my life, jumping in, making the mistakes, and learning as I go along.
So is there any projects that you're working on at the minute that you can tell us about?
Yeah, there's quite a few, especially a script. Okay, so I had this idea. So I read a book years ago by Stephen King called Writing. And as a writer, I liked his approach because it was unconventional. So when he created the film Misery, he said him and his wife, they were driving to this hotel and the snow was insane. And he thought, what if my car went off the road and then 4 days later I was found by my greatest fan ever. She turns out to be a complete psycho. So with all the kind of the COVID vaccine things going on, I had this what if moment. And what it was, it's a film based in the future, but only 2025. based in the future, and people are on their 7th booster. So I thought, well, what if some kind of side effect appeared that nobody expected, apart from, there's a character in this film called the Prophet, who's is a scientist. What if this side effect appears, and through this side effect, people age rapidly? So within a 3 to 4 week period, you go from looking your age, I'm guessing 21, 23 or something, you go from your age to looking 90 within 3 or 4 weeks. But more importantly, is there a cure? Well, in this particular film story, there's no cure, but there is. So 7.1 billion people now have a death sentence, but 310,000 people have the cure because they've not been vaccinated. So the film is almost like a chase film, and a horror film. And the chase film builds up with capturing these, what they call UVs, unvaccinated, capturing these UVs and extracting this particular thing from them to create the cure. But there's only 310,000. So it's only the rich, it's only the wealthy, it's only the powerful that can afford to catch these UVs. So that's one film I'm working on at the moment.
I love the concept. That's fantastic. So do you fear the art of independent film? Do you think it's a dying trade, or do you think it's something that's slowly growing and has thriving in the years to come?
I think it's thriving, because I think we've created, so in my other lives, I used to be a hairdresser. So when I was a hairdresser many years ago, to train as a hairdresser, you had to go to either Vidal Sassoon or Tony and Guy Academy. You couldn't get training anywhere else. You just couldn't. And then, of course, YouTube comes along. And suddenly you've got all these, like my daughter. She's a hairdresser, but she trained herself from YouTube. So the film industry is the same. Suddenly you've got all these indie guys like you characters here, you guys here, who are making brilliant films, independent films, with iPhones. I mean, it's insane. I mean, you've got brilliant equipment with you now, Sony cams, so top end stuff. But you've got these guys who are making, I mean, really spectacular pieces of film. And they're making it, you're going, oh my God. I took my 4-year-old son to watch The Snowman in Manchester Bridgewater Hall this year. There's an orchestra playing the music. And before it came on, they played a film, I can't remember what it's called. I think it was called The Bear. And basically, this young kid had made this animation film with cotton wool and this cotton wool bear and everything else with an iPhone. And it was on this, and the BBC loved it, they played it everywhere, it's been on film, obviously the resolution isn't right. But I thought, oh my God, that is what filmmakers are up against now. However, the inspiration derived from that is inspirational. That you can now make films, and to be honest, buying a decent 35mm camera, megapixels and 4K, etc., is cheap now. So you see these, I mean, in Altrincham we see people on the street all the time making films, and making cool films. I mean, Patrick made a little film, the guy who's behind over there doing the camera, he made a cool little Altrincham film, I thought it was really good. Just walking through town taking shots of things going on in the town. So indie films are growing dramatically. But I think the important thing with indie films is there's some amazing indie films being made, and they're being shown in the cinema, they'll be shown worldwide, they'll be shown nationally. It's just a thriving industry. And I think kids now, probably from when I was a kid, they're cutting concrete at the top, stones.
Right. It's just what we need.
Yeah, they're there all day.
Okay, alright. Is it? Okay, just carry on talking.
Yeah, so can you hear me okay through that? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's not ideal, but
Yeah, keep going. Okay. So we're here at Altrincham Market, which is one of your films that curator is about. So what is it about this local public environment that inspired you, that wanted you to make something about it?
Well, it began with a conversation. I've been coming here since it opened, and I knew Nick, but I don't know him. That's Nick, the owner. So I knew of him. And I always thought it'd be a cool first project to make a film about this place, but being a story writer and a writer, I didn't want to make a film about altering a market. So I said to Nick, I said, listen, so a young filmmaker's going to watch this. Who's going to watch this film? Who's going to watch this film?
It's a independent film review club. So
Okay.
Lovers of independent film.
Right, so I decided if you're a young filmmaker, just to jump in feet first and do it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to approach Nick and say I want to make a film. So he's a hard character to get hold of, so you have to go through someone to get hold of him.
I'm going off that bell.
That's
Every sound in the world is coming on.
It only comes on at 0:00
Brilliant.
on the number.
Yeah, okay, we'll work that. Okay. How's the thing going?
Sound.
Yeah.
Is it picking up okay or?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, continue at that point.
That's okay. I forgot where I was now.
Sorry.
Can we highlight this like voice that we're really, really?
You can hear it, obviously, but in post.
Okay. So you've been coming here for years, and it's like a
So
conversation.
I eventually spoke to Nick. We had breakfast together, and he said, "I've had everyone here, the BBC, Channel 4. They want to make a film about this thing." And I said, "Well, to be honest with you, if I do a crap job, you'll never see it anyway." I said, "So it will be a proper, what we called a bit of a rock and roll film." So I decided to interview him. First of all, then interview him on film. It took 2 days. We had about 14, 15 hours of film, I don't really remember, for a 30-minute film, 30-minute piece. And I just took his life history, his life story, and then we moved on to this, where the idea came from. So I thought it's such an interesting story because I've eventually decided I wanted to pull out the story, behind the man behind the story. That was the whole idea. And really it was a story of regeneration and curation. So really, when I first moved to Altrincham, the place was a dump and everything was closed. And when he opened this place, everybody wanted a piece of this, and everybody wanted to open a shop next to his. They wanted a little bit it's like touching the cloth of Jesus almost. They wanted a piece of his success. Excuse me. They wanted a piece of his success, so consequently, the town grew from here as a kind of an axle point, and these spindles just kind of kept growing and growing and growing, and we had a regenerated town. But I will tell you an interesting film for any new filmmaker, a story about that film if you want. What it was, I was talking about the inexperience earlier, and I was a new filmmaker. So we had a big Sony cam just like this, we had 3 cameras set up. And we had it on, we didn't have it on autofocus, and had an experienced guy as well. He made a cock up of the first bit, if I'm honest. And when we got back and we had the first 15 crucial minutes of the film, when we got back and started editing it, it was completely out of focus. So the only thing that was in focus was the place called, one of the shop units behind him. That was in focus, he was out of focus. It was a complete mess. So the first part of that film, I had to spend such a long time thinking, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to disguise that fact? There may have been 3 seconds of where he was in focus. If he moved like this, he went back into focus, and if he moved there, he went out of focus. So I managed to get those little snatches, and of course with a gimbal roving camera, and we had a static camera also, it wasn't as good. So there was a lot of kind of, not repair job, because I thought it looked cool in the end.
No, I really loved it. I watched it. And then just as a final point, if you had any advice for future filmmakers, independent filmmakers, or who are just kind of breaking into the industry, what is the? I'll take it. If you had any advice for any future filmmakers and up and coming independent artists, what would your advice be about filmmaking and the start of it?
Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is take it seriously. So if you're just going to mess around with an iPhone, forget it. So you have to aim high. So for me in my own life, I like to find somebody who's the best at what they do. and almost try to emulate what they do and how they do it. So for a while I studied Alfred Hitchcock at home. I thought, okay, that's cool, I can do that. Just by reading his biography, reading his interviews, watching him on YouTube and so on. I thought I can do that. So I kind of had this thing in my mind that I was going to take it very serious because I wanted to be a brilliant filmmaker. And the second thing is, don't be scared of making a cock-up. It just doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. So we had a few problems on this film, and I had to go back one day to his house. You know the bit at the end where he's dressed in white?
Yes.
And he's at his house? Well, I had two different endings for the film in my head. We had three. We had one that was filmed in here, which I hated. And I had another one which we couldn't achieve because it involved too many people. And I had the third one, which was Nick completely dressed in white, because I wanted it to have an almost saviour, godlike symbolism to it. And that's what kind of, and it went silent and the music kicked back in them. So don't be frightened of making mistakes. I mean, you will only learn from a mistake. A mistake is a good thing. Being stressed out is a good thing. Having a lot of hassle is a good thing, because hopefully it'll only happen once. And the next time you make the film, you won't make that mistake. But it doesn't really matter if you make the mistake. And I suppose the third thing is, if you can't afford a good camera, just, you know, you can rent a camera for 100 quid a day, 150 pounds a day. Rent a good camera, but take somebody with you that knows what they're doing. You may have the eye for how you want it to look in the shop, but you may not know how to use the camera and the equipment. So make sure you have someone who knows what to do. The very first film I made was a film called The Other Front Line. It was a documentary in Glasgow. And I swear to God, I had no idea what I was doing. So I went to Procam in Manchester and I rented everything. So I spent a fortune on renting this equipment. We took 5 microphones. This was to Glasgow. Strangely enough, only one of them worked. So we ended up having one microphone. And that was a microphone that worked. We rented 4 cameras. We used 2, but we settled with just the one shot in the end. So, you know, don't be scared of having a go. And, you know, if it's terrible, that's fine. But you've made your first film. That's the important thing. You've done that first film.
Brilliant.